The South China Sea is often portrayed as a contest of military power. By almost every conventional measure, China should have the advantage. It possesses the world's largest navy. It operates the world's largest coast guard. Its shipyards launch vessels at a pace unmatched by any other country. And across the disputed waters of the South China Sea, Beijing has spent more than a decade expanding its physical presence through patrols, infrastructure, and artificial islands. The Philippines cannot compete on those terms. Its resources are smaller. Its fleet is smaller. Its defense budget is smaller. Yet one of the most important strategic developments in the South China Sea today is not China's growing strength. It is the Philippines' effort to overcome its own weakness. In April 2026, China deployed 39 vessels around a single disputed reef. At roughly the same time, the Philippine Coast Guard had just 13 ocean-capable cutters available to patrol an entire nation's maritime frontier. At first glance, the imbalance appears overwhelming. But numbers alone do not determine influence at sea. Presence does. The ability to remain on station, the ability to monitor disputed waters, the ability to return again and again despite pressure from a stronger rival. That is why a series of seemingly routine projects now underway in Palawan may prove more significant than they first appear. A maintenance hub for Coast Guard vessels, fuel infrastructure for surveillance aircraft, expanded cooperation with the United States, growing support from Japan, Australia, and other partners. Viewed individually, these developments look modest. Viewed together, they reveal a larger strategy. The Philippines is not trying to match China ship for ship. It is trying to ensure that it can keep showing up. And in the South China Sea, that may be the most important form of power. Great power competition is often discussed in terms of military strength, economic power, or technological advantage. But in the South China Sea, geography still matters. Few places illustrate that reality better than Palawan. Stretching along the western edge of the Philippine archipelago, the island occupies a position that places it closer to many of the South China Sea's most contested waters than almost anywhere else under Philippine control. Just beyond it lie the Spratly Islands, where competing territorial claims, military deployments, and maritime confrontations have increasingly defined regional security. This geography gives Palawan strategic importance that extends far beyond the Philippines itself. For Manila, it serves as the country's forward position in the South China Sea. Coast Guard patrols, surveillance flights, and resupply missions all depend on access to the island. For Washington, it represents a natural platform from which Philippine maritime capabilities can be strengthened. And for Beijing, it sits uncomfortably close to waters China considers vital to its own strategic ambitions.
China Coast Guard Vessel 5901. This is Philippine Coast Guard Vessel BRP Gabriela Silang.
The significance of Palawan is not simply that it is near disputed waters. It is that proximity creates options. The closer forces are to an operational area, the easier it becomes to monitor activity, sustain patrols, and respond to emerging developments. Distance, by contrast, creates delays, increases costs, and limits endurance.
Your illegal activity will be reported to higher authorities. Over.
China recognized this reality years ago when it invested heavily in airstrips, ports, and support facilities across the South China Sea. Those projects were designed to solve a geographic problem: how to sustain a long-term presence far from the Chinese mainland. The Philippines begins from a different position. It already possesses the geography. What it lacks is the infrastructure needed to fully exploit it. And that is precisely why the story now turns to a little-known port in southern Palawan called Buliluyan. When people think about military power, they usually focus on what they can see. Warships, aircraft, missiles, but behind every vessel at sea lies a less visible reality. Maintenance, and for years, this was one of the Philippines' biggest weaknesses in the South China Sea. The problem was not simply a shortage of ships. It was keeping those ships operational where they were needed most. The Philippine Coast Guard operates across a vast maritime domain. But until now, it lacked a dedicated maintenance facility in Palawan, the region closest to many of the country's most sensitive maritime flashpoints. That created a serious challenge. When a vessel required repairs, servicing, or technical support, it often had to leave the operational area and travel elsewhere for maintenance. Every ship returning to port meant one less ship on patrol. Every day spent in transit meant one less day monitoring disputed waters. And every maintenance delay created an opportunity for larger maritime forces to strengthen their presence. This is why the proposed logistics and maintenance center at Buliluyan Port matters. Located in southern Palawan, Buliluyan already serves as a staging point for Philippine Coast Guard operations. The new facility would allow vessels to receive support much closer to the areas where they operate. That means less time in repair yards, less time traveling, and more time at sea. Because the competition in the South China Sea is increasingly a contest of endurance. The side that patrols more often gains influence. The side that remains present strengthens its position. And the side that can sustain operations over the long term gains an advantage that numbers alone cannot provide. The maintenance hub will not eliminate China's numerical advantage. That is not its purpose. Its purpose is to make every Philippine vessel more effective, to maximize limited resources, and to ensure that when tensions rise in the South China Sea, Philippine ships are already on station rather than heading home for repairs. But keeping ships at sea is only part of the equation. Because before a country can respond to events in the South China Sea, it first has to see them. Keeping ships at sea is important, but before a ship can respond to a threat, it first has to know where that threat is. And that is why some of the most important battles in the South China Sea are not being fought on the water. They are being fought in the air. Because in a maritime dispute spread across thousands of square kilometers, information is power. The side that sees first often gains the advantage. The side that understands what is happening in real time can react faster, deploy forces more effectively, and avoid being caught by surprise. For the Philippines, one location sits at the center of that effort: Antonio Bautista Air Base. Located in Puerto Princesa, Palawan, the base is the closest major Philippine military airfield to many of the disputed areas in the South China Sea. From here, aircraft conduct surveillance and reconnaissance missions, monitoring activity around the Spratly Islands and other contested waters. In many ways, Antonio Bautista serves as the country's observation post overlooking the West Philippine Sea. That is why the latest U.S.-backed project there matters. Washington is seeking to upgrade the base's fuel infrastructure. On paper, that sounds like a routine engineering project. In reality, it is about endurance. Every surveillance flight depends on fuel. Every patrol aircraft depends on fuel. Every hour spent monitoring the South China Sea depends on fuel. Without reliable fueling facilities, aircraft spend less time in the air. Their patrol areas shrink. Blind spots begin to emerge. And those blind spots can be dangerous. Chinese Coast Guard vessels, research ships, fishing fleets, and military aircraft operate across a vast maritime space. Incidents can develop quickly and often far from the nearest Philippine outpost. The ability to monitor those developments consistently has become a strategic necessity. This is why the Fuel Depot project fits perfectly with the maintenance hub at Buliluyan. One keeps ships operating longer. The other keeps aircraft flying longer. Together, they strengthen the Philippines' ability to maintain presence and awareness across contested waters. If Palawan is the front line of the Philippines' struggle in the South China Sea, then Scarborough Shoal is where that struggle becomes impossible to ignore. Again and again, tensions return there. Again and again, ships converge there. And again, Scarborough reminds the region why the South China Sea remains one of the world's most dangerous maritime disputes. Located roughly 200 kilometers west of the Philippines' main island of Luzon, Scarborough Shoal is not a large island chain or a major military base. Yet its importance goes far beyond its size. For the Philippines, the shoal has long been an important fishing ground and lies well within its exclusive economic zone under international maritime law. For China, Scarborough forms part of its broader claim over much of the South China Sea. That disagreement reached a turning point in 2012. Following a standoff between Chinese and Philippine vessels, China established effective control over the shoal. Since then, Chinese Coast Guard ships have maintained a regular presence in the area, while access for Philippine fishermen has become a recurring source of tension. More than a decade later, the dispute remains unresolved. And in 2026, Scarborough Shoal is once again at the center of attention. In recent months, Chinese Coast Guard, naval, and air activities around the shoal have continued to generate concern in Manila. Reports of possible new structures near the area, combined with increased patrol activity, have prompted Philippine authorities to closely monitor developments. For Manila, these events are not isolated incidents. The longer a country maintains a constant presence in a disputed area, the stronger its position can become in practice, regardless of the legal arguments involved. And every new development immediately attracts attention from both governments. Scarborough Shoal has become more than a territorial dispute. It has become a test of endurance, a test of whether the Philippines can maintain a consistent presence despite facing a much larger maritime power.
You are way beyond 200 nautical mile easy of your country. Please review your chart.
And suddenly, the infrastructure projects in Palawan begin to make sense. The maintenance hub at Buliluyan, the fuel upgrades at Antonio Bautista, the increased surveillance flights, the stronger Coast Guard presence. All of them are responses to situations unfolding right now in places like Scarborough Shoal. Because Philippine officials are not preparing for a hypothetical future crisis. They are responding to an ongoing competition that is already underway. A competition measured not in days or weeks, but in years. And it is precisely this reality that explains why the United States is becoming more deeply involved. Because in May 2026, something happened near Scarborough Shoal that would have been almost unthinkable just a few years earlier. For the first time, a United States Coast Guard cutter joined Philippine forces in operations near the disputed shoal. The growing tensions around Scarborough Shoal help explain why a significant milestone occurred in May 2026. For the first time, a United States Coast Guard cutter joined Philippine forces in a maritime cooperative activity near the disputed waters. The vessel, USCGC Midget, trained alongside the Philippine Navy and Philippine Coast Guard in maritime law enforcement, search and rescue operations, and interdiction exercises. At first glance, this may seem less important than a major naval deployment. This dispute is not being fought primarily by destroyers or aircraft carriers. Most encounters involve Coast Guard ships, fishing vessels, patrol aircraft, and law enforcement operations. It is a competition that exists below the threshold of war. That is why Coast Guards matter. They enforce maritime claims, they protect fishing rights, they maintain presence, and they help shape control without triggering open conflict. By sending a Coast Guard cutter rather than a warship, Washington was signaling that its support extends beyond military cooperation. The United States was demonstrating its commitment to helping the Philippines compete in the day-to-day realities of maritime rivalry. In fact, the United States is only one part of a much larger network of countries now helping Manila strengthen its position in the South China Sea. For years, the South China Sea dispute was often viewed as a contest between China and the Philippines. Today, that picture is changing. The Philippines is still at the center of the dispute, but it is no longer acting alone. The United States is helping develop critical infrastructure in Palawan. Japan is moving forward with plans to provide new multi-role Coast Guard vessels. Australia has expanded defense cooperation and participated in major military exercises alongside Philippine forces. France is supporting maritime patrol capabilities through funding and security cooperation. Taken individually, these contributions may seem modest. A maintenance facility, a fuel depot, a handful of cutters, joint exercises. But together, they reveal a broader trend. Countries across the Indo-Pacific are helping the Philippines strengthen its ability to monitor, patrol, and sustain operations in contested waters. Importantly, this is not about creating a force capable of matching China ship for ship. That would be unrealistic. Instead, the goal is to make the Philippines more resilient, more capable of maintaining a presence, more capable of responding to incidents, and more capable of protecting its interests over the long term. That is why Palawan has become such an important focal point. What was once simply a strategically located province is increasingly becoming the hub of a growing network of partnerships stretching across the Indo-Pacific. And when all of these developments are viewed together, a larger picture begins to emerge, ensuring that the Philippines can keep showing up in the South China Sea. At the beginning of this story, the numbers appeared to tell a simple story. 39 vessels around a single disputed reef. 13 ocean-capable cutters tasked with helping secure an entire maritime frontier. By conventional measures, the balance seems obvious. China possesses greater resources, larger fleets, and a far more expansive maritime presence. The Philippines cannot hope to match those advantages ship for ship, aircraft for aircraft, or dollar for dollar. But that assumption misses the more important strategic reality. The central challenge in the South China Sea is no longer simply who can arrive. It is who can remain. For more than a decade, China has pursued a strategy built on sustained presence. Artificial islands, Coast Guard patrols, maritime infrastructure, and administrative control have all served the same objective, creating the ability to operate continuously in disputed waters. What is now emerging in Palawan is, in many ways, a response to that reality. The maintenance hub at Buliluyan, the upgrades at Antonio Bautista Air Base, expanding cooperation with the United States, and growing support from regional partners are not isolated initiatives. Together, they represent an effort to solve a fundamental strategic problem: how a smaller maritime power can remain present in a contested space dominated by a larger rival. That does not eliminate the imbalance between China and the Philippines, nor does it fundamentally alter the regional balance of power. What it does is make that imbalance more difficult to translate into uncontested control. And that may prove more important than raw numbers alone. Because influence in the South China Sea is not determined solely by fleets, budgets, or military inventories. It is shaped by persistence, by visibility, and by the ability to maintain a presence over time. In that sense, the story of 13 ships versus 39 is not really about ships at all. It is about the enduring relationship between geography, strategy, and power. And it is a reminder that in maritime competition, the decisive advantage often belongs not to the actor that arrives first, but to the one that develops the capacity to stay. We cannot afford to be blind in our own waters. That was how one Philippine defense official reportedly framed it this week, and honestly, that line hits hard. Because here's the real question. What happens when the world's most contested waters sit right at your doorstep? Do you stay quiet and hope the storm passes? Or do you finally decide to anchor yourself firmly in the middle of it? This week, the Philippines chose the second option. In the latest move that's sending ripples across the Indo-Pacific, Manila inaugurated the Mahatao Forward Operating Base near the Luzon Strait, that narrow, deep water corridor between Luzon and Taiwan where global trade ships pass silently by day and warships glide through at night. It's not just another base. It's a statement, a very deliberate one. The Luzon Strait isn't some random patch of blue on the map. It connects the South China Sea to the open Pacific. Oil tankers, container ships, submarines, aircraft carriers, they all move through this space. If tensions ever spiral in the Taiwan Strait, this passage becomes critical in hours, not days. Think of it like a highway interchange during rush hour. Whoever controls visibility and access there doesn't just monitor traffic, they shape it. And for years, the Philippines has watched this corridor from a distance. Sometimes cautiously, sometimes nervously. But things have changed. China's growing naval footprint in the South China Sea, from Coast Guard deployments to gray zone pressure tactics, has pushed Manila into a different strategic mindset. This isn't the Philippines of a decade ago, hedging quietly. This is a country recalibrating its defense posture in real time. Mahatao, located in Batanes province, sits almost at the northern edge of the Philippine archipelago. On a clear day, locals say you can almost feel how close Taiwan is. Fishermen there have long understood that geography is destiny. Now, that understanding has turned into infrastructure. This new facility strengthens maritime domain awareness. It improves response times. It deepens coordination with allies, particularly the United States and Japan, who see the Luzon Strait as a strategic artery in any regional contingency. And yes, it signals to Beijing that Manila is no longer comfortable playing the peripheral actor. There's something human about this shift too. For decades, the Philippines has balanced between asserting sovereignty and avoiding escalation. It has tried dialogue. It has absorbed pressure. It has tested accommodation. But deterrence, real, visible deterrence, requires presence. And presence requires steel, radar, runways, and resolve. This isn't about provocation. It's about positioning. The inauguration of the Mahatao Forward Operating Base marks more than a construction milestone. It marks a psychological shift. A country that once hesitated is now preparing. A maritime state is finally reinforcing its northern gate. So the real question isn't whether this base changes the strategic equation. It already does. The deeper question is whether this move stabilizes a fragile balance in the Indo-Pacific or pushes the region one step closer to something far more kinetic. Either way, the Luzon Strait just got a lot more consequential. Before we get lost in strategy and headlines, it helps to pause and look at the map. Geography has a way of explaining politics better than any press conference ever could. The Luzon Strait lies between Luzon in the Philippines and Taiwan, stretching roughly 250 kilometers across. On paper, it's just a body of water. In reality, it's a narrow gateway connecting the South China Sea to the Western Pacific. That alone makes it powerful. It's one of those places that doesn't make noise, but quietly shapes outcomes. Every day, massive cargo ships pass through that corridor carrying energy supplies, electronics, food, and everything in between. It's a commercial lifeline for East Asia. Beneath those waters run undersea communication cables, the hidden system that keeps financial markets, military communications, and internet traffic alive across the region. Most people never think about those cables. But if they were disrupted, the consequences would be immediate and widespread. Then there's the military dimension, and this is where the Luzon Strait becomes even more consequential. Naval forces moving from the South China Sea into the Pacific, including submarines, often pass through this corridor. Its position makes it an ideal monitoring point. Whoever can observe activity there gains early warning. And in strategic terms, early warning is everything. Geography here isn't passive. It's leverage. Now place that geography inside today's security environment.
Starboard cap.
Tensions between Manila and Beijing have steadily intensified over the South China Sea. Disputes around Scarborough Shoal and the Spratly Islands are no longer abstract diplomatic disagreements. They play out at sea, often involving direct encounters between vessels. Chinese Coast Guard ships have been recorded operating as close as 43 kilometers from the Philippine coastline. That proximity shifts the psychological landscape. It no longer feels distant or theoretical. It feels immediate. At the same time, China has increased its naval and air activity in and around the Taiwan Strait. Exercises such as Strait Thunder 2025A may be framed as routine drills. But from Manila's perspective, they signal a rising tempo of military preparedness in its near periphery. When major power competition intensifies just north and west of your territory, you don't have the luxury of detachment. This broader environment has shaped Philippine defense policy in noticeable ways. For decades, the armed forces of the Philippines focused largely on internal security challenges. External defense modernization moved slowly. That trajectory has changed. The acquisition of the BrahMos anti-ship missile system was a clear pivot toward deterrence by denial. The ability to impose costs on hostile naval forces operating near Philippine waters. Additional investments, including guided missile corvettes and surveillance upgrades, reinforce this shift toward building credible maritime defense capability. Alliances have also regained strategic weight. The 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States is no longer treated as symbolic architecture from the Cold War era. It has evolved into an operational framework with expanded exercises, planning coordination, and defense dialogues. Interoperability is no longer aspirational, it is being institutionalized. Seen together, geography, rising regional tensions, and a modernization drive converge into a single logic. The Luzon Strait is not a peripheral space. It is a strategic hinge. And in a moment when the Indo-Pacific balance feels increasingly fragile, hinges become focal points. If geography sets the stage, this base is the entrance cue. On August 28, 2025, the Philippines inaugurated the Mahatao Forward Operating Base in Mahatao, Batanes, the northernmost province of the Philippines. It sits roughly 120 miles south of Taiwan. That distance might sound comfortable on paper. It isn't. In strategic terms, that's close, very close. Batanes itself feels remote. Windswept hills, dramatic coastlines, small communities used to typhoons and isolation. But that remoteness is precisely why it matters. From this position, you're at the gateway to the South China Sea, and just beside the Bashi Channel, a deep water corridor submarines and naval vessels used to move between enclosed seas and the open Pacific. It's not flashy territory. It's consequential territory. And here's the thing, this base isn't symbolic, it's functional. Operationally, it hosts units under the Northern Luzon Naval Command and a Marine Battalion landing team. That combination matters. Naval presence provides maritime reach, marine forces add rapid response and expeditionary capability. Together, they create a forward posture rather than a reactive one. In practical terms, that means quicker deployment timelines, better coordination, and fewer blind spots. The infrastructure is designed to support maritime surveillance and logistics staging. Think sensors, mobility, supply chains. Not just watching the sea, but being ready to act if necessary. It allows for rapid projection of naval and marine assets into surrounding waters. And in deterrence strategy, readiness is the message. One of its core purposes is enhancing maritime domain awareness. The Luzon Strait is busy, strategically layered water. Monitoring vessel movements, tracking patterns, and distinguishing between routine transit and abnormal activity requires presence. You cannot manage what you cannot see. This base improves visibility, and visibility stabilizes decision-making. Then there's deterrence. And this is where the signal becomes unmistakable. Establishing a forward operating base this close to strategic transit routes demonstrates a commitment to defending sovereign waters and exclusive economic zones. It communicates preparedness without necessarily escalating. Presence, when calibrated, can reduce miscalculation. The base also serves a cooperative function. It is positioned to support joint exercises and interoperability with partners such as the United States, Japan, and Australia. In today's Indo-Pacific security architecture, coordination is as important as capability. Shared drills, logistics integration, and communication alignment reduce friction during crises. And it's not purely about conflict scenarios. The Philippines is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. Typhoons, earthquakes, maritime accidents, they are recurring realities. A forward base in Batanes can also function as a humanitarian staging point. That dual-use dimension matters. Defense infrastructure that supports disaster response strengthens public legitimacy. What makes Mahatao significant isn't just its hardware, it's the strategic shift it represents. For years, the northern frontier of the Philippines was quiet, important, but underdeveloped in military terms. That is no longer the case. This is forward defense thinking. This is geographic realism translated into infrastructure. And in a region where timing and positioning define outcomes, positioning this far north changes the board. This is where things get real, because a base isn't just concrete and radar systems. It's a signal, and signals travel fast in the Indo-Pacific. For Manila, the most immediate implication is territorial security. The northern maritime frontier has historically been quieter than the South China Sea flashpoints. But quieter doesn't mean safer. With a forward operating base in Mahatao, the Philippines can now project a defensive presence into waters that were previously monitored at a distance. That shortens response time. It strengthens patrol coverage. It shifts posture from reactive to anticipatory. And that matters. There's also the surveillance dimension. Enhanced monitoring through the Luzon Strait supports broader efforts to protect marine resources and uphold maritime law. Illegal fishing, unauthorized transits, gray zone activities, these are persistent challenges. Surveillance isn't just about warships, it's about governance. It's about demonstrating that maritime zones aren't empty spaces, but regulated ones. If you zoom out, this is a country that spent decades underinvesting in external defense. Now it's correcting that imbalance. Slowly, but deliberately. From Beijing's perspective, the equation looks different. The establishment of a forward base so close to strategic transit routes signals Manila's intent to deter further coercive pressure. It reinforces the reality that the Philippines is deepening defense coordination with partners across the Indo-Pacific. That alignment, whether through exercises, intelligence sharing, or access arrangements, alters the operational landscape. China may interpret the move as part of a broader containment arc supported by the United States and regional partners. Even if Manila frames the base as sovereign self-defense, which it is, perception shapes reaction. And in strategic competition, perception often matters as much as capability. The concern in Beijing will not simply be the base itself. It will be what the base represents. A Philippines less hesitant to assert maritime rights and more integrated into allied security planning. At the regional level, the implications extend beyond bilateral tensions. The Luzon Strait sits along critical sea lanes that underpin regional trade and energy flows. A more robust Philippine posture contributes to stability in that corridor by improving monitoring and response capabilities. Stability here is not abstract. It affects shipping insurance rates, energy security, and crisis management timelines. The base also strengthens collective deterrence. Security in the Indo-Pacific increasingly relies on networked partnerships rather than isolated alliances. Bilateral dialogues, multilateral naval exercises, interoperability frameworks, these mechanisms reduce the risk of miscalculation by clarifying commitments and capabilities. In theory, credible deterrence lowers the probability of conflict. In practice, it requires careful calibration. Too little presence invites pressure. Too much visibility risks escalation. The Philippines is attempting to strike that balance, asserting sovereignty while avoiding provocation. And that balancing act will define whether the Mahatao forward operating base becomes a stabilizing anchor or another focal point in an already crowded strategic theater. Either way, the northern edge of the Philippines is no longer peripheral. It's central to the evolving security architecture of the Indo-Pacific. The moment a base like this opens, the reaction doesn't stay local. It travels through diplomatic cables, defense briefings, media headlines, and quiet strategic calculations. From Washington's side, support has been direct and consistent. The United States has reaffirmed expanded defense cooperation with the Philippines, including longer operational schedules and deeper planning dialogues. The tone has been firm but measured, emphasizing alliance commitments while framing activities as defensive and stabilizing. There's also the hardware dimension. Plans involving systems such as the Typhoon missile system reflect a layered deterrence approach. Philippine officials have repeatedly described these deployments as purely defensive, intended to strengthen readiness, not provoke confrontation. Still, the symbolism is powerful. Advanced capabilities positioned near a major maritime choke point are impossible to ignore. From Beijing's perspective, skepticism is almost guaranteed. China is likely to interpret the expansion of infrastructure and allied coordination near the Luzon Strait as part of a broader strategic alignment aimed at constraining its maneuver space. Increased militarization near critical waterways, especially those connected to the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, touches directly on China's core security concerns. Even if Manila frames its actions as sovereign self-defense, Beijing will analyze them through the lens of regional power balance. And in great power politics, perception often moves faster than reassurance. The Luzon Strait development fits into a broader pattern of quiet rebalancing across the Indo-Pacific. Countries are modernizing, partnerships are deepening, yet almost everyone is trying to avoid open escalation. It's a delicate equilibrium, strategic hedging in motion. Opening a forward base is one thing, sustaining it is another. Batan's is geographically remote. Supply chains are longer. Weather conditions can be unforgiving. Maintaining year-round operational readiness in such a location requires consistent logistics planning, infrastructure resilience, and financial commitment. A forward posture only works if it's sustainable. There's also diplomatic sensitivity. China remains a major economic partner for the Philippines. Trade, investment, tourism, these ties don't disappear because of security tensions. Manila must navigate defense strengthening while managing economic interdependence. That balance is complex and sometimes uncomfortable. And domestically, defense expansion must coexist with development priorities. Infrastructure, poverty alleviation, disaster resilience, these remain pressing national concerns. Strategic modernization cannot appear detached from public welfare. It has to be framed and implemented as part of a broader national security concept that includes economic stability and humanitarian readiness. Strategic clarity is important. So is political calibration. The Mahatao Forward Operating Base marks a watershed moment in Philippine defense strategy. It enhances maritime domain awareness. It strengthens deterrence along a critical northern frontier. And it reinforces alliance networks in an Indo-Pacific environment defined by intensified power competition. As tensions continue to evolve around the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, the Philippines is signaling a shift from reactive posture to proactive defense planning, from peripheral observer to engaged stakeholder in regional security architecture. More than concrete and command posts, the base represents strategic foresight. It reflects a recognition that geography cannot be changed, but preparedness can. In the end, Mahatao is not just about positioning forces. It is about positioning the Philippines within the evolving balance of power, asserting sovereignty, strengthening partnerships, and navigating deterrence without surrendering stability. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion. What happens when the world's busiest trade highway turns into a naval chessboard? That's the question hanging heavy over Asia right now. In the latest jolt of breaking news, Chinese warships and Coast Guard vessels have surged back into contested waters of the South China Sea, shadowing U.S. naval activity and circling flashpoints like Scarborough Shoal. One regional security official summed it up bluntly: this is no longer signaling, this is positioning. And suddenly, Manila is on high alert, allies are dialing each other up, and the calm blue waters are starting to look dangerously crowded. Picture this for a second, a stretch of sea carrying nearly $3 trillion in global trade every year, now packed with destroyers, patrol ships, and combat aircraft flying too close for comfort. This isn't some distant maritime dispute, it's the route your fuel, food, electronics, and energy supplies travel through. Scarborough Shoal, just a short sail from the Philippine coast, has once again become ground zero, with China flexing power and the Philippines responding by tightening coordination with the United States and regional partners. One wrong move here doesn't just make headlines, it rewrites security equations. And that's why this moment hits different. This isn't about one patrol or one provocation, it's about who controls the rules of the sea. Beijing's deployments challenge freedom of navigation, test international law, and directly push back against U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific. For the Philippines, it's an uncomfortable reminder that sovereignty isn't abstract. It's defended in real time, under real pressure. The South China Sea is no longer simmering in the background. It's boiling, and the world is watching to see who blinks first. All right, let's set the stage properly because none of this is random, and none of it started yesterday. The South China Sea has been contested for decades, long before today's headlines and warship movements. China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan all lay overlapping claims to islands, reefs, and waters in this strategically priceless maritime zone. On paper, many of these claims are supposed to be governed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which defines territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and maritime rights. In reality, power politics often outweigh legal diagrams. What should be clear-cut lines on a map have turned into gray zones patrolled by coast guards, naval vessels, and surveillance aircraft.
What you see on the screen is a depiction of the South China Sea, and you see the red dashes around the perimeter of the South China Sea.
The tension exploded into legal warfare in 2016, when an international arbitral tribunal in The Hague delivered a landmark ruling in favor of the Philippines. The court decisively struck down China's sweeping 9-line claim, declaring it had no legal basis under UNCLOS. For Manila, the verdict was a diplomatic weapon, proof that international law was on its side. For Beijing, it was a red line. China rejected the ruling outright, calling it null and void, and has since acted as if it never existed. That legal standoff still defines today's confrontations. The Philippines cites the ruling in protests and speeches, while Chinese ships continue operating as if the map never changed. Layered on top of this is the constant presence of the United States Navy, which views the South China Sea not as a regional dispute, but as a global test case. Through regular freedom of navigation operations (FNOP), U.S. warships deliberately sail near contested features, including recent patrols close to Scarborough Shoal, to challenge what Washington calls excessive maritime claims. The message is old school but crystal clear: the seas stay open, no matter who tries to fence them off. As U.S. officials put it, these missions defend the right to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. And every time an American ship shows up, Chinese vessels shadow it, turning the South China Sea into a high-stakes standoff where law, history, and raw power collide. Now here's where things get real, because this isn't just talk anymore, it's steel in the water and aircraft in the sky. Over the past few days, China has rolled out serious naval and air power into waters claimed by the Philippines. And the composition of these forces matters. Guided missile destroyers and frigates, not symbolic patrol boats, have been tracked operating close to sensitive areas, signaling high-end combat readiness rather than routine law enforcement presence. These platforms are built for air defense, anti-ship warfare, and long-range operations. Meaning, this deployment is designed to be seen, noted, and calculated by everyone watching the radar screens. Even more eye-catching is the aerial component. China has flown H-6 strategic bombers, aircraft capable of carrying YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles with an estimated strike range of up to 500 kilometers. That's not defensive posturing, that's a clear reminder of reach. From those distances, major naval formations, ports, and sea lanes fall well within potential engagement zones. In simple terms, Beijing is quietly saying, we can hit far, and we can hit fast. Officially, China's Southern Theater Command is playing it cool. The patrols are described as routine, while Manila is accused of colluding with external forces, diplomatic shorthand for working too closely with the United States and its allies. According to Beijing, these deployments are meant to preserve peace and stability. It's a familiar script: assert dominance, deny escalation, blame the other side. Old playbook, new hardware. At the core, China's stated objective remains unchanged. Beijing insists it is defending territorial sovereignty and responding to what it calls provocations by rival claimants and outside powers meddling in regional affairs. But the scale and sophistication of the forces involved tell a deeper story. This isn't just about protecting claims. It's about shaping behavior, intimidating opponents, and setting red lines in real time. In the South China Sea, China isn't asking for attention anymore. It's commanding it. Washington didn't waste time responding, and it responded the way it always has, by showing up, staying visible, and refusing to blink. The U.S. Navy has surged Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers alongside littoral combat ships into waters near disputed shoals, reinforcing what officials call a persistent presence in the South China Sea. These aren't ceremonial sail-bys. Arleigh Burkes are among the most capable surface combatants afloat, packed with Aegis air defense systems, cruise missiles, and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Their deployment sends a quiet but unmistakable signal. The U.S. is prepared to operate in contested waters and stay there. At the heart of this posture is freedom of navigation operations, a doctrine Washington treats almost like sacred tradition. U.S. officials stress that these operations are fully consistent with international law and not aimed at any single country, even if everyone knows who's being challenged. One Pentagon spokesperson cut straight through the noise, stating that China's maritime claims do not deter us. In plain terms, the message is simple and old school. No nation gets to rewrite the rules of the sea by force. But beneath the tough talk lies a very real danger. The South China Sea has already seen near misses, aggressive shadowing, and even collisions between Chinese vessels during high-speed maneuvers. Add American warships, Chinese destroyers, bombers overhead, and Coast Guard vessels weaving between them, and the margin for error shrinks fast. A misjudged turn, a misread radar contact, or an overly aggressive intercept could trigger a crisis no one actually planned for. That's the uncomfortable truth of the current U.S. posture. Deterrence keeps the peace until it doesn't. And in these crowded waters, where pride, power, and patrol routes collide, escalation doesn't need intent. It only needs one bad moment. For Manila, this isn't theory or great power abstraction. This is happening right off its coast, and the response has been sharp, public, and deliberate. The Philippine government has moved quickly on the diplomatic front, issuing official protests and lodging firm representations with the Chinese embassy over both Beijing's rhetoric and its expanding maritime presence. Philippine officials have pushed back hard against accusations of collusion, stressing that defending sovereign rights is not provocation. In statements from Malacanang and the Department of Foreign Affairs, the message is consistent. China's actions are being challenged on record, in writing, and through international channels, no quiet acceptance, no silent retreat. At sea, the posture has tightened. The Philippine Navy and Philippine Coast Guard have stepped up patrols across the West Philippine Sea, keeping a closer watch on contested areas and maintaining presence near sensitive features. While Manila knows it cannot match China ship for ship, visibility itself has become a form of resistance. Each patrol shows the same point: these waters are not abandoned, and sovereignty isn't surrendered just because the other side is bigger. Diplomatically, the Philippines is also playing the long game. Coordination with the United States remains central, especially through joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and operational planning under existing defense agreements. At the same time, Manila continues engaging ASEAN partners, pushing for unity, consultations, and a rules-based approach to maritime security. It's a careful balancing act, strengthening alliances without triggering outright escalation. The Philippine response is quiet but firm, cautious but unmistakable. Manila isn't pounding the table, but it isn't backing down either. In a region where silence can be mistaken for consent, the Philippines is making one thing clear: it's present, it's watching, and it intends to stand its ground. What's unfolding in the South China Sea doesn't stay neatly boxed inside national borders, it ripples across the entire region. For ASEAN, these tensions are a stress test of unity. Some member states are deeply uneasy about being dragged into a confrontation between major powers, preferring quiet diplomacy and strategic ambiguity. Others, especially claimant states, are increasingly vocal about the need to push back against coercive behavior before it becomes the new normal. The result is a familiar Asian dilemma: consensus versus credibility. Every flare-up exposes how hard it is to speak with one voice when national interests, threat perceptions, and economic ties to China all pull in different directions. The economic stakes raise the temperature even further. The South China Sea isn't just geopolitically sensitive, it's economically indispensable. These waters carry critical shipping lanes and energy routes that feed East Asian manufacturing hubs, fuel markets, and consumer supply chains. Any serious disruption, whether from military standoffs or heightened insurance risks, would ripple straight into ports, prices, and production lines. For economies built on just-in-time trade, even short-term instability can translate into long-term uncertainty. Then there's the most immediate danger: maritime safety. The sea is getting crowded, and not just with warships. Military vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and maritime militia are operating in close quarters, often at high speed and under political pressure. Each aggressive maneuver, each shadowing incident, raises the odds of an accident, and in this environment, accidents don't stay accidents for long. One collision, one misread intention, and the region could find itself in an escalatory spiral no one planned for, but everyone would have to deal with. In short, the South China Sea is becoming more than a dispute zone, it's a regional fault line. And the longer tensions simmer, the harder it becomes for Asian, markets, and mariners alike to pretend this is business as usual. At the core of all this naval muscle flexing is a much quieter battlefield, international law, and that fight may be the most consequential of all. The legal backbone of the South China Sea disputes is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Under UNCLOS, coastal states are granted clearly defined maritime entitlements, including territorial seas and exclusive economic zones extending up to 200 nautical miles. This framework is what anchors the Philippines' legal position in the West Philippine Sea. Manila argues that its claims aren't based on power or history, but on codified international law that most of the world recognizes and follows. In theory, UNCLOS is supposed to remove ambiguity. In practice, it's become the very thing being contested. China, however, plays by a different script. Beijing asserts historical rights that it argues predate UNCLOS and justify its extensive presence and deployments across much of the South China Sea. This interpretation has been widely challenged, especially after the 2016 arbitral ruling, but China continues to treat these claims as non-negotiable. From Beijing's perspective, patrols, exercises, and ship deployments are not violations. They are enforcement of long-held sovereignty. Law, in this view, bends to history and power. The United States cuts straight across that argument. Washington insists that freedom of navigation and overflight are protected under UNCLOS norms and customary international law, regardless of competing sovereignty claims. That's the legal logic behind U.S. freedom of navigation operations. They are not about ownership of reefs or shoals, but about preventing any single state from turning international waters into restricted zones. Every FONOP is a legal statement made with a warship, and that's the real tension. One side sees law as fixed rules, the other treats it as flexible history. Until those visions align or one clearly prevails, the South China Sea will remain not just a military standoff, but a legal one, fought ship by ship, patrol by patrol. When you strip away the press statements and naval posturing, what's left is a tense strategic equation, and none of the outcomes are guaranteed to stay tidy. One possible path is de-escalation, driven by sustained diplomacy, military hotlines, and confidence-building measures. This is the scenario everyone publicly claims to want: fewer risky maneuvers, clearer communication, and a return to managed competition. But let's be real, de-escalation in the South China Sea doesn't mean ships go home. It means tensions are contained, not resolved, and restraint becomes a daily operational choice rather than a permanent fix. The more likely near-term scenario is a prolonged standoff. Persistent patrols, shadowing operations, and shows of force continue, but without major incidents. Friction becomes normalized. Each side learns the other's habits, thresholds, and red lines. This kind of frozen confrontation feels stable on the surface, but it's exhausting, expensive, and inherently fragile. One political crisis elsewhere or one aggressive captain at sea can shatter the balance overnight. The most dangerous scenario is escalation, and the scary part is that it wouldn't have to be intentional. An unintended collision, an aircraft intercept gone wrong, or a misinterpreted radar lock could trigger rapid military responses before diplomacy has time to catch up. In an environment thick with nationalism and alliance commitments, even a minor incident can spiral faster than leaders can control. Complicating all of this is the accelerating technological edge. Advanced missile platforms, long-range strike systems, real-time surveillance drones, and networked sensors are compressing decision-making timelines. Commanders now see more, track faster, and react quicker, which sounds stabilizing until it isn't. Speed reduces room for human judgment, and in contested waters, that can turn seconds into strategic consequences. Bottom line, the South China Sea isn't drifting toward resolution, it's hardening into a test of endurance, discipline, and crisis management. The danger isn't war by design, it's war by miscalculation, and history tells us that's often how the worst ones start. Zoom out for a second, and it's obvious the South China Sea isn't just about reefs and shoals anymore, it's a front line in the US. China strategic rivalry. Every patrol, every statement, every joint exercise feeds into a much larger contest over influence, credibility, and leadership in the Indo-Pacific. For Washington, presence equals commitment to allies, to international law, to an open maritime order. For Beijing, pushing back is about reshaping that order and proving it can no longer be dictated from outside the region. The result? Alliances are tightening, defense cooperation is deepening, and neutral ground is getting harder to find. Multilateral diplomacy is supposed to be the pressure valve, but progress has been painfully slow. UN platforms and related mechanisms offer space for dialogue, confidence building, and rule setting. Yet consensus remains elusive. Competing interests, economic dependencies, and strategic caution keep outcomes watered down. The long-discussed code of conduct in the South China Sea, for example, moves forward inch by inch, always discussed, never quite delivered. Still, these forums matter. In a crisis-prone environment, even slow diplomacy is better than silence. That's why dialogue, however imperfect, remains essential. Military deterrence may prevent immediate conflict, but only sustained diplomatic engagement and respect for international norms can prevent long-term instability. Hotlines, maritime communication protocols, and regular consultations don't solve sovereignty disputes, but they can stop misunderstandings from turning into flashpoints. In a region this tense, talking is not weakness, it's damage control. What we're witnessing now is a clear escalation in geopolitical intensity. China's expanded naval deployments, the United States' firm maritime posture, and the Philippines' heightened state of alert all point to a South China Sea that is more contested, more crowded, and more consequential than ever. This isn't a temporary spike, it's a new normal taking shape in real time. The risks are obvious and serious. Military operations intersect with strategic rivalry and unresolved legal claims, creating a volatile mix where miscalculation could carry regional, even global consequences. Trade routes, energy flows, alliance credibility, and international law are all on the line. When great power competition plays out at sea, the margin for error is dangerously thin. The path forward is narrow but clear. Stronger diplomacy, greater transparency, and consistent adherence to lawful maritime conduct are no longer optional. They're essential. The South China Sea has always been a crossroads of commerce and culture. Whether it becomes a corridor of cooperation or a theater of confrontation depends on the choices being made right now, while the ships are still maneuvering and the lines are not yet crossed.
Chinese Warship 629, Chinese Warship 629. This is Philippine Navy Warships 16. You are entering in our exercise area.
The Philippines sits at the heart of one of the most contested maritime regions on the planet. Comprising 7,641 islands and straddling critical sea lanes linking the South China Sea to the broader Western Pacific, the country's geography has always been both its greatest asset and its deepest vulnerability. Nearly 2 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone surround the archipelago, encompassing vital fisheries, energy prospects, and underwater infrastructure, much of it overlapping with competing claims by China and several Southeast Asian neighbors. What has changed is the intensity of pressure. In recent years, confrontations in the West Philippine Sea have shifted from diplomatic disputes to persistent, on-the-water coercion. Coast Guard blockades, water cannon attacks, ramming incidents, and the steady normalization of foreign presence inside areas Manila considers sovereign. These encounters have made clear that traditional, centralized defense concepts, built around defending territory as if it were contiguous land, are ill-suited for a fragmented maritime nation facing a gray zone challenge at sea. It is against this backdrop that Manila has articulated an archipelagic defense strategy. Rather than attempting to mirror the force structures of continental powers, the ADS rethinks defense through the logic of geography. Islands as defensive nodes, sea space as maneuver terrain, and maritime awareness as the foundation of deterrence. The strategy seeks to protect sovereignty not by matching adversaries ship for ship, but by denying easy access, raising operational costs, and leveraging the natural complexity of the archipelago itself. This explains the archipelagic defense strategy, why it emerged, how it is designed, and what it means for Philippine security at a time of rising regional tension. More importantly, it asks a deeper question now confronting many maritime states. In an era where control is asserted without war, can geography still be turned from a vulnerability into a strategic advantage? The archipelagic defense strategy represents a fundamental shift in how the Philippines conceptualizes national defense, moving away from a historically land-centric posture toward a framework centered on maritime security and deterrence. For decades, Philippine defense planning was shaped primarily by internal security challenges and the protection of major population centers on land. The ADS departs from this legacy by starting from geography rather than tradition. It recognizes that the country's true frontiers are overwhelmingly maritime, with contested zones located hundreds of kilometers from the main islands, and that sovereignty in the modern Indo-Pacific is contested not on borders, but across sea space. Under the ADS, defense priorities are reoriented toward protecting sea lines of communication, securing islands and maritime features, and safeguarding the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and sovereign rights. This approach reflects the reality that control of surrounding waters is inseparable from national survival for an archipelagic state. Sea lanes are not just commercial arteries, but strategic lifelines. Isolated islands are not peripheral outposts, but forward defensive nodes. And the EEZ is not abstract legal space, but a zone of food security, energy potential, and strategic depth. In this sense, the ADS treats the ocean not as a buffer to be crossed, but as the primary domain in which deterrence must be established.
With the fluid security situation in our region, it is imperative that the armed forces of the Philippines, and of course the Navy, is substantially equipped, trained, and always on alert to respond to any and all exigencies that may confront our nation.
Crucially, the archipelagic defense strategy is anchored not only in military logic, but in law. Its foundations rest on the Philippines' domestic constitutional mandate to protect territorial integrity, which explicitly includes maritime domains. This is reinforced by the archipelagic doctrine, which affirms Philippine sovereignty over the waters connecting and surrounding its islands, treating the archipelago as a single, coherent political and geographic unit, rather than a collection of disconnected landmasses. At the international level, the strategy draws legitimacy from the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides the legal basis for the Philippines' maritime entitlements and rights.
The new government here in Manila is grappling with what might be called catastrophic success. What comes next is obviously going to be a delicate balancing act. It is a time for cool head.
The legal dimension gained particular weight following the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling, which invalidated China's expansive 9-line claims over most of the South China Sea. While enforcement of the ruling remains contested, it provides Manila with a powerful normative foundation for resisting coercion and framing disputes within a rules-based order. The ADS leverages this legal strength by pairing it with a defense posture designed to uphold rights on the water through presence, awareness, and denial, rather than escalation. The urgency behind the archipelagic defense strategy is inseparable from the China factor and the accelerating pattern of coercion in the South China Sea. Beijing's expansive claims under the so-called 9-line overlap extensively with Philippine maritime zones, including waters rich in fisheries and potential hydrocarbon resources. To enforce these claims, China has relied not on overt naval warfare, but on a calibrated mix of Coast Guard deployments, maritime militia swarms, artificial island construction, and the militarization of outposts, methods designed to assert control while staying below the threshold of armed conflict. Recent incidents highlight how this pressure has intensified. In December 2025, the Philippine Coast Guard reported that Chinese vessels used high-pressure water cannons and deliberately cut anchor lines of Filipino fishing boats near Scarborough Shoal, injuring 3 fishermen and damaging 2 vessels.
They were subjected to water cannon attack and dangerous blocking maneuver. This was done by China Coast Guard 21559 and 21562.
Manila condemned the actions as dangerous, unlawful, and in violation of basic maritime safety norms. But the episode showed a sobering reality. Coercion at sea has become persistent, physical, and normalized. Around the same period, Philippine defense officials disclosed that they tracked as many as 49 Chinese Navy and Coast Guard ships operating in disputed waters in a single month, an unusually high concentration that exceeded previous averages and demonstrated China's growing ability to sustain presence at scale. These developments expose the Philippines' structural vulnerabilities as a maritime state. Geography is both a blessing and a constraint. Long coastlines, thousands of islands, and vast sea space complicate surveillance, coordination, and rapid response. Defense resources further compound the challenge. The Philippines' naval and air forces remain modest in size compared to China's expanding fleet and aviation assets, creating an imbalance that cannot be corrected through platform parity alone. Even more critical are capability gaps, persistent shortfalls in maritime domain awareness, limited long-range fires, and logistics constraints that reduce Manila's ability to enforce sovereignty independently across distant waters. It is precisely these asymmetries that make the archipelagic defense strategy relevant. The ADS does not assume the Philippines can outbuild or outnumber China. Instead, it accepts the imbalance and seeks to manage it. By emphasizing surveillance, denial, island-based defense, and the protection of sea lanes, the strategy aims to complicate coercion, raise operational costs, and prevent gray zone pressure from translating into uncontested control. In this context, the China factor is not merely a backdrop, it is the defining condition that has forced Manila to rethink defense through the logic of geography, resilience, and sustained maritime presence, rather than traditional notions of dominance. At the heart of the archipelagic defense strategy is the recognition that deterrence in a maritime environment begins with awareness. Maritime domain awareness is therefore the foundational pillar of ADS, aimed at ensuring the Philippines can see, understand, and respond to activity across its vast surrounding seas before situations escalate into crises. This involves expanding radar coverage, leveraging satellite-based surveillance, and integrating intelligence shared by allied partners. Maritime patrol aircraft and unmanned systems extend reach over distant waters, allowing Philippine forces to track vessels, identify patterns of behavior, and distinguish routine movement from coercive activity. In a gray zone environment, early detection is decisive. The ability to document and respond quickly often determines whether pressure is resisted or normalized. Building on awareness, the strategy emphasizes island defense and denial rather than outward power projection. ADS is not designed to contest control of distant seas, but to make hostile action within and around the archipelago prohibitively costly. This is achieved by fortifying key islands and maritime choke points, while avoiding large, static bases that are vulnerable to precision strikes. Instead, the strategy favors mobile, asymmetrical force packages that can be dispersed, repositioned, and sustained under pressure. Denial capabilities, particularly coastal defense and anti-ship missile systems, form the backbone of this approach. Often described as a porcupine model, the logic is straightforward. Even a stronger adversary must think twice if entry into contested waters carries high operational risk without decisive gain. Naval and Air Force modernization provides the muscle that enables these concepts to function in practice. The Philippine Navy's commissioning of modern frigates under the Horizon Modernization Program has already enhanced patrol, surveillance, and deterrence capacity, while missile drills and upgraded fast attack craft strengthen rapid response and coastal defense roles. Looking ahead, plans to acquire additional patrol vessels, maritime patrol aircraft, and eventually submarines are intended to add depth and persistence, particularly in underwater and long-range surveillance. Submarines, in particular, would introduce a powerful deterrent dimension by complicating adversary planning and expanding the Philippines' strategic options without requiring surface dominance. Crucially, the archipelagic defense strategy extends beyond the military domain into a whole-of-nation and whole-of-government approach.
I'm performing law enforcement duties of the jurisdictional waters of the People's Republic of China.
Effective maritime defense requires coordination not only among the armed forces, but also with the Coast Guard, civilian agencies, and local governments. Coastal communities are envisioned as early observers and reporting nodes, contributing to situational awareness and resilience at the grassroots level. This integration reflects an understanding that in an archipelagic state, national defense is not confined to bases or fleets. It is distributed across geography, institutions, and society itself. Together, these pillars form a coherent defensive architecture. Awareness enables response, denial raises costs, modernization sustains credibility, and national integration ensures resilience. Alliances and strategic partnerships play a critical enabling role in the archipelagic defense strategy, reinforcing national capability while compensating for structural limitations inherent to an archipelagic state.
Next day in Washington, a first step is taken in the direction demanded by Dewey as the United States and the Philippines sign a mutual defense treaty.
At the core of this network is the United States, with the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty remaining the cornerstone of Manila's external security assurances. While the treaty provides the legal and political foundation for mutual defense, its operational relevance today is shaped by more recent mechanisms. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement enables rotational U.S. force presence, pre-positioning of equipment, and access to agreed locations across the archipelago, directly supporting the ADS logic of rapid response, logistics resilience, and forward deterrence.
The municipality of Tarat, of course, to our American counterparts, welcome to the Philippines.
Frequent joint exercises, including increasingly complex maritime and multi-domain scenarios, enhance interoperability and signal deterrence credibility in contested waters without requiring permanent foreign basing. Beyond the United States, the Philippines has deliberately diversified its security partnerships to avoid over-reliance on any single actor while reinforcing its maritime posture. Japan has emerged as a particularly important partner, providing patrol vessels, maritime surveillance equipment, and capacity-building assistance aligned with Manila's needs in maritime law enforcement and domain awareness.
Australia's future is with Asia has really become a reality, and that's why the closeness between our countries, between Australia and the Philippines, is terribly important.
Australia, South Korea, and several European states have similarly expanded cooperation through training, joint exercises, defense financing, and technical support. These relationships strengthen the ADS by improving surveillance coverage, operational standards, and sustainment capacity, all while remaining consistent with a defensive, non-escalatory posture. Within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, collective security mechanisms remain limited by consensus-based decision-making and divergent threat perceptions. As a result, Manila has adopted a pragmatic approach, sustaining diplomatic engagement and regional dialogue while ensuring that defense readiness does not depend on ASEAN-wide action. This balance reflects a clear-eyed assessment that while regional diplomacy is essential for stability, deterrence in contested maritime spaces ultimately rest on national capability supported by reliable partners. In strategic terms, alliances under the archipelagic defense strategy are force multipliers rather than substitutes. They provide intelligence sharing, logistics depth, training realism, and political signaling that amplify Philippine capabilities without undermining sovereignty or strategic autonomy.
So the range rings are these little rings you guys see right there?
By embedding its defense posture within a web of partnerships while retaining control over national strategy, the Philippines seeks to ensure that its archipelago is not defended in isolation, but anchored within a broader, rules-based security architecture, one that raises the costs of coercion while preserving regional stability. Despite the progress embodied in the archipelagic defense strategy, its implementation is constrained by structural, political, and strategic limitations that Manila must carefully manage. Budgetary pressure remains the most immediate challenge. While recent defense allocations, including notable increases in the 2025 budget aimed at naval and maritime modernization, signal growing political recognition of external threats, defense spending continues to compete with pressing domestic priorities such as social services, infrastructure, and economic development. For an archipelagic state with vast maritime responsibilities, sustaining long-term investment in ships, aircraft, sensors, and personnel places persistent strain on limited fiscal space. Capability gaps further complicate execution. Building maritime awareness and denial forces is not solely a matter of acquiring platforms. It requires resilient logistics networks, trained personnel, maintenance capacity, and sustained operational readiness across dispersed islands. These enablers are often less visible than ships or missiles, yet they determine whether strategy translates into real deterrence. Without consistent investment in human capital, sustainment, and command and control integration, the risk is that capabilities remain uneven or episodic rather than persistent. There is also an inherent escalation dilemma. Strengthening defenses under the ADS is designed to deter coercion, not provoke confrontation. But in a tense maritime environment, even defensive measures can be misinterpreted. The archipelagic defense strategy carries implications that extend well beyond Philippine borders, reshaping the strategic environment in the South China Sea and the wider Indo-Pacific. By prioritizing maritime awareness, denial, and legal legitimacy, the strategy contributes directly to the preservation of freedom of navigation and the practical upholding of international law. More significantly, it demonstrates that smaller and middle powers are not condemned to passivity in the face of coercion. Through calibrated deterrence rather than confrontation, the Philippines signals that sovereignty can be asserted within a rules-based order, even when power asymmetries are stark. As a result, Manila is increasingly viewed not merely as a claimant state, but as a frontline actor within the Indo-Pacific security architecture, one whose posture reinforces the resolve of allies and partners while complicating unilateral attempts to alter the status quo. Looking ahead, the success of the archipelagic defense strategy will depend less on any single platform or acquisition than on sustained political and institutional commitment. Maritime defense is a long game. It requires stable funding across decades, continuity in modernization and force posture development, and steady investment in personnel, logistics, and command and control systems. Equally critical will be the ability to manage crises effectively. In an environment defined by gray zone pressure and close encounters at sea, deterrence must be paired with communication channels, escalation control, and disciplined decision-making. Under ADS, the Philippines is not seeking dominance, but manageability, an approach that aims to deter coercion while preventing competition from tipping into conflict. Ultimately, the archipelagic defense strategy reflects a strategic truth shaped by geography. For a nation defined by the sea, defense cannot be conceived from the mainland outward. It must be built within and across the maritime domain itself.
629. This is Philippine Navy Warship 16. You are.
By centering defense on the ocean, grounding policy and law, modernizing forces realistically, and embedding national efforts within a network of partnerships, Manila is crafting a posture aligned with its constraints and ambitions. Defense by the sea, not from it, is both necessity and choice. In an era of contested waters and great power rivalry, the ADS represents the Philippines' effort to turn geography from vulnerability into leverage, protecting sovereignty while contributing to regional stability in one of the world's most strategically vital maritime theaters. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.
As the security landscape continues to shift rapidly, our strategic foresight must ensure that the Philippines is always one step ahead.
China's pressure on the Philippines has moved from occasional flare-ups to a grinding, almost daily campaign of intimidation at sea. And it now feels like the entire region is watching the front line run right through Philippine waters. Filipino crews are being rammed by larger Chinese vessels, hit with high-powered water cannons strong enough to injure sailors and shatter equipment, targeted with military-grade lasers, and shadowed by swarms of Coast Guard and militia ships that deliberately crowd, block, and box them in near key features like Second Thomas Shoal and Scarborough Shoal. What used to be framed as incidents has hardened into a pattern, a deliberate strategy that many in Manila now sum up as China's ICAD approach: illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive.
The Philippines strongly affirms its respect for this milestone decision as an important contribution to ongoing efforts in addressing disputes in the South China Sea.
It's illegal because it brazenly ignores UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitral ruling. Coercive because every move is designed to make the Philippines back down. Aggressive because each new tactic goes a step further than the last. And deceptive because Beijing continues to label these actions as law enforcement or routine operations, even as the footage shows otherwise. But the story today is no longer just about what China is doing. It's about how the Philippines is changing in response.
You know, we are not here to bemoan whatever it is that China is doing, but really to again form that coalition. We are not against anyone. We are just for territory, the defense of our territory, the respect to the exercise of our sovereign rights.
Manila is no longer behaving like a passive victim, filing notes verbalis, and hoping statements from abroad will be enough. Instead, it is quietly assembling a new defense ecosystem that stretches far beyond ships and guns, building coastal missile forces and air defenses, deepening alliances with the US, Japan, and other partners, mastering strategic transparency to win the information war, strengthening its legal and diplomatic offensives, and beginning to prepare its society psychologically for a prolonged contest at sea. The central shift is this. The Philippines is moving from reaction to resilience. Rather than treating each Chinese provocation as an isolated crisis, it is developing a long-term, multi-domain blueprint that blends deterrence, alliance architecture, information warfare, and national mobilization. A new strategic posture aimed not just at surviving China's pressure, but at shaping the balance of power around it. The security landscape confronting the Philippines today no longer resembles the world its old defense playbooks were written for. China has perfected a brand of hybrid warfare at sea that operates below the threshold of open conflict but inflicts strategic damage all the same, using its Coast Guard and maritime militia as frontline instruments instead of warships flying naval flags. At Scarborough Shoal, collisions and blocking maneuvers have become routine. At 2nd Thomas Shoal, laser attacks and high-pressure water cannons have been used not as warnings, but as tools of intimidation designed to injure crew members and cripple equipment. At the same time, Beijing deploys a parallel information campaign, from disinformation about fake rescues to narratives framing its actions as law enforcement, intended to confuse international audiences and erode Manila's credibility. This is why the Philippines has discovered that law and public perception have become as crucial as ships and aircraft.
With regard to the impact of China's island building and other activities on the marine environment, the tribunal retained its own independent experts to assess the harm caused by these activities. They found that the harm caused by China to the marine environment was devastating and irreparable.
The 2016 Hague ruling remains the country's most powerful legal anchor, but it only matters when the world sees the truth of what happens at sea. In this era, video evidence, transparency briefings, and narrative control are strategic weapons in their own right. And overarching all of this is the realization that modern conflict isn't confined to waves and warplanes. It spans cyber intrusions, diplomatic pressure campaigns, economic leverage, and psychological operations meant to exhaust public resolve. The old model of defending territory with patrols and diplomatic protests simply cannot cope with the speed, scale, and multidimensional nature of China's coercive strategy. The Philippines is now operating in a battlefield where reality must be proven, perception must be defended, and national security is measured across military, informational, digital, and societal fronts all at once. The Philippines is undergoing one of its most important military transformations in decades. A shift away from scattered, reactive patrols toward a hardened coastal defense architecture designed to withstand and deter sustained Chinese pressure. This begins with the outposts themselves. Islands like Pagasa, Lawak, and Likas, once little more than remote detachments with radio towers, are being upgraded with modern radar systems, longer runways, hardened shelters, and reinforced command posts, while new monitoring stations in Batans push surveillance right up to the Luzon Strait. These facilities are no longer isolated dots on a map. They're becoming nodes in a wider surveillance web tied into Allied satellite feeds, Japanese maritime radars, American ISR networks, and Australian patrol routines. On the water, the Philippines is abandoning the old model of sending a few large ships to show the flag and hoping they can outrun or outmaneuver harassment. Instead, it is moving to a distributed maritime patrol concept built around smaller, more agile vessels supported by drones, maritime patrol aircraft, and real-time intelligence from partners like Japan, Australia, the United States, Canada, and France. In practice, this means Philippine vessels now sail with eyes far beyond the horizon and with backup that extends across oceans. But the biggest doctrinal shift lies in the embrace of anti-access area denial, a strategy long practiced by Taiwan, Vietnam, and other small states facing stronger adversaries. Manila is now investing in mobile missile batteries, long-range sensors, and sea denial systems that raise the cost of any hostile operation approaching Philippine waters. The idea is no longer to simply be present, but to make presence meaningful, to ensure that any attempt to coerce, blockade, or encroach on Philippine territory confronts a layered defense that can see, track, and if necessary, strike approaching threats. This is not the Philippines of a decade ago. This is a country methodically building a coastal shield, resilient, networked, and increasingly capable of shaping its maritime space rather than merely reacting to violations within it. The Philippines isn't just working with partners anymore, it is embedding itself into an emerging collective shield that now defines the Indo-Pacific's security architecture. What once looked like a loose set of bilateral ties has matured into trilateral and quadrilateral defense webs, with the Philippines, the United States, Japan, and Australia conducting joint patrols, coordinated exercises, and integrated surveillance for the first time in modern history. These relationships are no longer symbolic, they are operational. The Japan-Philippines-US axis now provides maritime and aerial coverage across the Luzon Strait and the West Philippine Sea, while a parallel Philippines-Australia-US channel supports training, basing, and joint responses across the archipelago. When all four, Japan, the US, Australia, and the Philippines, align in a single patrol or exercise, the message is unmistakable. Any aggression will be observed, recorded, and responded to by a coalition rather than by a single state. This shift is reinforced by new defense access agreements that fundamentally change Manila's strategic position.
I wish to acknowledge the arrival of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Philippines, Her Excellency Maria Theresa.
Japan's Reciprocal Access Agreement, Tokyo's first in all of Southeast Asia, allows Japanese forces to train and operate on Philippine soil, a milestone that signals a historic shift in Japan's post-war defense role.
Of the Philippines, colleagues and friends, it's an honor to join you here in Manila to mark the signing of the Status of Visiting Forces Agreement between Canada and the Philippines.
Canada has signed a military cooperation pact that opens its training pipelines and logistics programs to Philippine forces, while the European Union is integrating the Philippines into broader maritime awareness platforms that help track illegal vessels and coercive maneuvers across the South China Sea. Together, these agreements elevate the Philippines from a regional outlier to a central node in the Indo-Pacific security network. And this matters profoundly because alliance embedding creates a deterrence multiplier. China, once able to pressure Manila without consequence, must now calculate the risks of confronting not just a single country, but a coalition of democracies with overlapping treaties, interoperable assets, and the eyes of global media fixed on every incident. Escalation becomes harder, coercion becomes riskier, and even routine aggression begins to draw international scrutiny. In this new environment, the Philippines is no longer isolated at sea. It stands inside a protective mesh of allies whose presence, coordination, and shared commitments make Beijing think twice before tightening the pressure. This is the collective shield concept, an ecosystem of alliances that transforms Manila's strategic vulnerabilities into a broader, shared deterrent. One of the most revolutionary changes in the Philippines' defense posture is its decision to turn truth itself into a strategic weapon, a public truth campaign that goes far beyond simple transparency and now functions as a form of deterrence. For years, China relied on ambiguity, secrecy, and controlled narratives to mask its coercive behavior. But the moment the Philippine Coast Guard began releasing raw, unfiltered footage of water cannon blasts, laser attacks, and ramming attempts, the information battlefield changed instantly. These videos, crisp, painful, undeniable, went viral across the world, forcing journalists, diplomats, lawmakers, and militaries to confront what was happening in Philippine waters. Every clip became a piece of evidence, every encounter a diplomatic dossier, every confrontation a global conversation. And as each video spread, China's disinformation narratives began to crack, because it is difficult to claim professional conduct when the whole world is watching sailors cling to the deck as a jet of water shreds their equipment. But the campaign doesn't stop at documentation. Manila is now fighting narrative warfare against a far broader challenge. Beijing's United Front operations that aim to influence public opinion, infiltrate local institutions, distort media narratives, and divide political discourse. The Philippines is countering this with stronger cybersecurity units, digital literacy programs, and a coordinated messaging effort that equips the public and the government to resist manipulation.
Hi, sir.
At the international level, Manila has learned to play on bigger stages. It now brings its evidence-backed cases to the UN, ASEAN, APEC, and every available diplomatic forum, ensuring that global allies hear one consistent message grounded in reality, not propaganda. What used to be a country quietly filing diplomatic notes is now a nation leveraging truth as a strategic tool, a weapon that exposes, delegitimizes, and constrains Beijing's coercion. And in a contest where perception shapes policy, Manila has discovered that a well-timed video, a verified map, or a transparent briefing can sometimes carry more deterrent weight than a patrol ship alone. Perhaps the most underestimated, yet most transformative change in the Philippines' evolving defense posture is its embrace of a whole-nation resilience model. Not the shallow slogan often repeated in briefings, but a true strategic concept that recognizes national security is no longer just a military responsibility. It begins in the coastal barangays, where fishermen, long treated as bystanders in the maritime struggle, are now being integrated into early warning networks through GPS tracking programs, community briefings, and direct links to Coast Guard stations. These communities, once isolated and vulnerable, are slowly becoming the frontline sensors of a sovereign nation. At the same time, Manila has started closing the loopholes that once left critical infrastructure exposed to foreign influence. Attempts by suspicious entities to infiltrate telecom networks, buy into major ports, or gain leverage over power grids and logistics hubs are now being scrutinized with an intensity unimaginable a decade ago. The government has begun building internal immunity, treating economic security, digital sovereignty, and infrastructure control as essential pillars of national defense. This resilience extends into the legal and diplomatic fronts as well. New laws are emerging to protect critical infrastructure from covert acquisitions, prevent data exfiltration, and guard against foreign political interference. Diplomatically, Manila is coordinating exposure campaigns that reveal underground CCP influence operations, while aligning more closely with democratic partners on sanctions, intelligence sharing, and transparent reporting. For the first time, the Philippines is constructing a layered shield that spans its coastline, its economy, its information space, and its civic landscape, a recognition that resilience is not built on soldiers alone, but on citizens, institutions, and the quiet, everyday fortifications of a country refusing to be bent by pressure. This is not merely a shift in tactics, it is the emergence of a new national mindset. Security is everyone's business, and sovereignty is defended by the entire system of the state. A major evolution in the Philippines' strategy is its decision to treat international law not just as a shield, but as an offensive instrument, a form of counter-pressure that forces China to justify its actions before the entire world.
The new government here in Manila is grappling with what might be called catastrophic success. What comes next is obviously going to be a delicate balancing act. It is a time for cool heads.
The 2016 arbitral ruling, once celebrated and then left underused, is now being wielded as a strategic weapon. Every new incident, every water cannon blast, every unlawful blockade becomes another example of Beijing violating a ruling that the global community already recognizes as legally binding. Manila is no longer content with simply citing the decision. It is using it as a diplomatic lever that shapes narratives in foreign capitals and places China in the position of a repeat offender, unable to reconcile its claims with established international norms. At the same time, the Philippines is forging quiet but powerful coalitions with middle powers like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, countries that share similar maritime concerns and whose own legal positions overlap with Manila's. By harmonizing maritime claims, supporting joint submissions to the UN, and presenting a united front rooted in UNCLOS, these states transform scattered voices into a coordinated legal chorus that challenges China's expansive assertions. This coalition building doesn't need a formal alliance. Its strength comes from the consistency of its legal logic, the legitimacy of its claims, and the shared interest in resisting revisionist territorial ambitions. The more Manila leans into lawfare, the more the burden shifts to Beijing. Every escalation must now be defended not against a single rival, but against the expectations of the international community. In this environment, China's coercive tactics generate diplomatic costs, damage its soft power, and narrow the space for ambiguity. Law, once treated merely as a courtroom victory, has become a battlefield of its own, and the Philippines, for the first time, is fighting on it with purpose and precision. The strength of the Philippines' new strategic blueprint becomes most visible when examined through real incidents, where each crisis reveals how Manila's doctrine now functions in practice. At 2nd Thomas Shoal, a ramming incident that could easily have spiraled into open confrontation instead showcased Manila's restraint and its mastery of gray zone crisis management. Rather than escalating, the Philippines documented the attack, filed coordinated diplomatic protests with allies, and ensured the footage reached international organizations, turning China's aggression into a self-inflicted reputational wound. Meanwhile, on land, the uncovering of United Front infiltration attempts in local institutions demonstrated that the conflict is no longer limited to ships at sea. It is also cognitive warfare, attempts to influence narratives, pressure local leaders, and manipulate public sentiment. The government's response, involving cybersecurity agencies, transparency briefings, and rapid exposure of foreign-linked operations, revealed a new national reflex: defend the information space as fiercely as the maritime domain. These case studies illustrate a new strategic reality. China now faces multi-dimensional pushback every time it attempts coercion. Diplomatic isolation rises, legal exposure deepens, global media scrutiny intensifies, and allied coordination activates automatically. The Philippines, once portrayed as vulnerable and alone, has gained something that can't be bought: credibility. Its transparency, discipline, and alliance-centric strategy have earned it international sympathy and support, turning the power imbalance into a moral imbalance that Beijing cannot easily counter. The growing perception in foreign capitals is clear. The Philippines is no longer an easy target. It is resilient, interconnected, and strategically agile. This leads to the larger conclusion: the Philippines is pioneering a new model of small state deterrence in the 21st century. Manila is proving that a country does not need to match a superpower's military tonnage to defend its sovereignty. It can leverage geography, alliance networks, information dominance, legal warfare, and societal cohesion to neutralize coercion in smarter, asymmetric ways. This is deterrence born not from superior firepower, but from superior strategy. In this new reality, China can still pressure the Philippines, but the Philippines can expose that pressure, resist it, counter it with allies, and rally global opinion against it. And that shift alone changes the balance of power. The Philippines is no longer playing China's game. It is rewriting the rules for how smaller democracies stand firm against authoritarian intimidation. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues. The South China Sea, a vital artery of global trade, has once again become the stage for a dangerous confrontation. In August 2025, the unprecedented collision between a Chinese naval destroyer and a China Coast Guard vessel while attempting to block a Philippine ship turned a simmering dispute into a geopolitical powder keg. The Philippine mission was civilian-led, with the BRP dispatched to Scarborough Shoal to assert sovereign rights and supply Filipino fishermen. What followed was a dramatic showdown, with Chinese ships employing reckless blocking maneuvers and water cannons, culminating in the stunning collision of China's own vessels. The aftermath exposed the inherent dangers of Beijing's gray zone tactics and the high-stakes environment in which even missteps can escalate into international crises. The numbers only sharpen the picture. The clash occurred just 10.5 nautical miles from Scarborough Shoal, well within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile EEZ, as affirmed by the 2016 Hague ruling.
Regardless of these numbers, the Philippine Navy remains fully on top of the situation, demonstrating continued heightened vigilance and sustained presence in our maritime domain. With our strengthened maritime domain awareness and interagency coordination, your Armed Forces of the Philippines assures the public of our continued commitment to asserting the nation's rights.
Chinese pressure is rising too. In June 2025, a record 49 Chinese vessels operated in 3 disputed areas, the highest monthly total of the year. With $5.3 trillion in annual trade flowing through the South China Sea, every collision and blockade reverberates far beyond Manila and Beijing. Experts warn that China's reckless behavior could spiral out of control, triggering wider crises, while Philippine officials have made their stance clear. Amidst coercion and escalation, they will not back down. The ripple effects are already reshaping alliances and strategies. The Scarborough incident directly tested the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, and Washington responded swiftly, with U.S. Navy warships conducting freedom of navigation operations near the shoal. Yet reassurance comes with risk. Closer alliances also mean thinner margins for error. Instead of retreating after humiliation, China doubled down, swarming 2nd Thomas Shoal with Coast Guard, naval, and militia forces, hardening an escalation cycle that drags the region closer to the brink. Legally and diplomatically, however, the Philippines has gained ground. Every clash reaffirms the 2016 Hague ruling, giving Manila leverage to rally allies like the US, Japan, and Australia against Chinese coercion. Scarborough is no longer just a reef, it is evidence.
The August 2025 standoff at Scarborough Shoal is a microcosm of the entire South China Sea dispute. Reckless gray zone tactics, a test of international law, and a contest of wills between an underdog nation and a rising superpower. The path forward is fraught. China will likely seek to reassert dominance and save face, while Manila, backed by its allies, presses forward with assertive, civilian-led missions. The risk of miscalculation remains dangerously high. The South China Sea showdown is now a high-stakes game of chicken, with global consequences, and the world is watching. Will international law and collective resolve hold the line, or will coercion and unchecked ambition dictate the future of the Indo-Pacific? The August 2025 Scarborough Shoal standoff began not with warships, but with a mission of civilians. The Philippines dispatched the BRP Siluan, a Philippine Coast Guard cutter, as the lead escort for a Kadiwa ng Bagong Bayaning Mangingisda, KBBM, mission, a supply and solidarity run meant to bring food, fuel, and essentials to Filipino fishermen working inside the country's exclusive economic zone. But this was more than charity. It was part of Manila's bold new strategy, not just to endure China's harassment, but to document and publicize it for the world to see. The fishermen aboard weren't just receiving rice and fuel, they were carrying a message of sovereignty. What awaited them at Scarborough was a wall of steel. Multiple China Coast Guard CCG cutters were already on station, shadowed by a People's Liberation Army Navy PLAN destroyer, the PLAN Guilin. The coordinated presence of China's Coast Guard and Navy was no accident. It's a signature of Beijing's gray zone tactics, a deliberate blurring of civilian law enforcement and military force designed to intimidate while avoiding a formal declaration of war. Against the single Philippine cutter, China brought an armada. The harassment began almost immediately. Chinese vessels performed high-speed blocking maneuvers, swerving dangerously close to the BRP Siluan in what sailors call shouldering and crossing the bow, tactics meant to intimidate and force a smaller vessel off course. Then came the familiar but dangerous weapon, a high-pressure water cannon blasting the Philippine cutter as it attempted to hold its line. The tension on deck was visible, every move filmed by PCG cameras as part of Manila's assertive transparency campaign. But then came the twist that shocked the world. In the chaos of repeated blocking attempts, the PLAN Buliluyan and one of the Chinese Coast Guard cutters, hull number 3104, both maneuvering aggressively to box in the BRP Suluan, collided with each other. The crash was caught in full view of PCG cameras, two massive Chinese vessels slamming together in their own attempt at intimidation. The Coast Guard later called it a moment of fratricidal collision, an accident born of recklessness and poor seamanship. And while the Philippine cutter managed to escape unscathed, the Chinese ships were not so lucky. The aftermath was striking. The CCG cutter 3104 suffered serious bow damage, left unseaworthy, according to Philippine reports. Even more disturbing, PCG observers noted seeing 4 Chinese crew members on deck moments before impact, men who vanished after the collision, raising fears of casualties. Meanwhile, the Plan E destroyer, though also heavily damaged, made no attempt to render assistance to its stricken Coast Guard counterpart. To naval experts, this was more than negligence. It was a violation of centuries-old maritime tradition and a breach of international humanitarian norms. The world saw not a show of strength, but a breakdown of discipline. As footage of the collision spread, the narratives diverged sharply. The Philippines seized the moment, framing it as proof of both Chinese aggression and Chinese incompetence. PCG spokesperson Commodore J. Terriella took to the podium, calling it a case of poor seamanship by Chinese crews and praising the Suluan's skilled maneuvering. He highlighted that despite being the target of harassment, the Filipino crew had offered assistance to the damaged Chinese vessel, an offer ignored. For Manila, the story became a powerful propaganda victory, flipping Beijing's intimidation into a humiliation.
China, on the other hand, went silent. For 4 days, there was no official word, no acknowledgement of the footage flooding social media and news networks. Finally, Beijing's defense ministry broke its silence, not to admit the collision, but to accuse the Philippine vessel of dangerous maneuvering and illegally entering Chinese waters. Crucially, the statement never mentioned the crash between the PLAN destroyer and the CCG cutter, a glaring omission that revealed how sensitive Beijing was to the global perception of clumsiness and incompetence. For a country obsessed with projecting strength and control, the sight of its own ships colliding was a humiliation too big to admit. The August 2025 Scarborough Shoal standoff didn't happen in a gray, ambiguous patch of sea. It happened just 10.5 nautical miles from the shoal itself, deep inside the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Under the 2016 Hague Tribunal ruling, that zone was legally affirmed as Philippine territory, invalidating China's sweeping 9-dash line. By any measure of international law, the Chinese vessels that boxed in the BRP Suluan were operating illegally. And that makes the collision between China's own ships not just a humiliation, but a violation playing out on the wrong side of the law. This was not an isolated encounter. It is part of a sharp upward trend. In June 2025, the Philippine Navy documented a record 49 Chinese vessels active across 3 separate disputed zones in just 1 month, the highest tally so far that year. It was a clear demonstration that Beijing's gray zone campaign is expanding in both scope and intensity. Each new flotilla, each new blockade, brings with it a higher risk of confrontation and miscalculation. What used to be occasional standoffs are becoming routine pressure tests, wearing down Manila's resources and pushing the limits of its patience.
The stakes go far beyond Philippine sovereignty. The South China Sea is the lifeline of global commerce, carrying an estimated $5.3 trillion worth of trade every year. Tankers carrying oil from the Middle East, container ships bound for Japan, Korea, and the US, fishing fleets supplying protein for millions, all pass through these waters. Every clash, every water cannon blast, every collision forces insurers to raise premiums, compels captains to alter routes, and sends shivers through already fragile supply chains. In other words, when a Chinese destroyer and a Chinese Coast Guard vessel collide trying to block a Filipino cutter, It's not just Manila that pays the price. The world economy feels the shock. Experts warn this is the shape of danger in the Indo-Pacific. Not open war, but 1,000 reckless acts that could trigger one. As M. Reese Bro wrote in The Diplomat, this incident underscores how China's aggressive, unprofessional, and destabilizing approach to securing its illegal maritime claims could quickly spiral out of control. Singaporean scholar Colin Koh of RSIS added bluntly, "It shows how close we are to an incident that triggers a wider diplomatic and military crisis." These aren't exaggerations. They're warnings based on years of watching the gray zone turn darker by the month. And yet, in the middle of this